Hi, and welcome to the video lecture for chapter number 3, which concerns the small group as a system. Now, that sounds relatively simple, but this is where the course really starts heading into theoretical territory. We're going to look at systems theory, which is a critical element of any small group communication course. And I'm going to try to use very practical examples to explain how small groups operate as systems and what that means for your output. So again, I'll try to be rapid. I'm going to try to move through this very quickly. Remember, you need to be reading your textbook as well. It is crucial. I don't cover everything in these lectures that's in the textbook. The textbook doesn't cover everything that I do in these lectures. So both are very, very critical for your success. But let's jump right in. If you've read chapter 3 already, you know that it frames small group communication or small group work through a system mentality. We define a system as an entity made up of components in interdependent relationship to each other, requiring constant adaptation among its parts to maintain organic wholeness and balance. Whoa, that's a huge definition, isn't it? Well, don't think like about machines and interdependence and wholeness and organic and balance. Those are all critical parts. Let's break this apart and explain it very simply. A system is really a collection of people, and that's what you see on the screen here. There's what, 21 different people standing in front of you. That's really what a small group is. It's a collection of people. But each of those people has a unique role. So all these people may look the same, but they all bring something different to the table, right? What I bring to a small group and what you bring to a small group are completely different. In fact, that's why small groups are so great to work within, because we're each bringing individual skill sets that in and of themselves are insufficient to tackle a task, but when combined with other skill sets can actually do significant things. So each of these people brings something different, and they all contribute to the overall success of this system. But what happens when some people leave? Because inevitably that happens in small groups. On your job, people come and go. In the classroom, people come and go. As a student working group, one of you may have a car accident and may have to leave the course for the rest of the semester. So what happens when old people go and new people come? What does that even mean? Well, what it does is it changes the whole dynamic of the system. And a system may no longer operate in the same capacity that it once did. But it doesn't cease to operate, right? I mean, things continue to move forward, it just changes. And a new dynamic is developed. See, why the dynamic changes all goes back to interdependence, which is the property of a system such that all parts are interrelated and affect each other as well as the whole system. So when we go back here, the dynamic has changed, and as new people come in, it's going to change again, and change again, and change again, and change again. We can think of interdependence almost like missing pieces of the puzzle, right? So interdependently, people work together to contribute to an overall outcome. As with this puzzle, each piece brings a different element, but they're all interdependent. Those puzzle pieces in and of themselves suck. They're boring. Who wants to play with one puzzle piece? That's not what you do with puzzles. No, a puzzle is an overall masterpiece that's insufficient unless each individual piece comes together and does its part. Apologies with this error message. The same thing goes with groups. Each group member is a little gear, and those gears all work together to ensure that the overall group process goes where it's supposed to go. This relates to a process we know as non-summativity. So you may have heard the term synergy. This relates here as well, but non-summativity is the property of a system that the whole is not the sum of its parts, but may be greater or lesser than the sum. So this whole concept is that you plus me does not equal 2. You and I together do not equal 2. You plus me equals greater than or equal to 3. Because there's you, there's me, and there's our relationship. Now, in theory, we say it's greater than or equal to, but what could really happen is if our relationship is bad, if you and I are placed in a working relationship or a working group together and we have a bad friendship or a bad relationship or a bad history, it could actually detract so that our output is actually less than what two people would normally be able to do. It may be less efficient. Really, really interesting, right? Well, this non-summativity and this interdependence really, really work together. Let's use it in a practical way. Let's assume you were in a car accident and you're driving down the road, you hit a tree, you're okay, but you're trapped in your car. Well, the first person that shows up is the police. They want to make sure you're okay. They got a call. Maybe you called 911 and they showed up first. But your car's on fire. So the firemen show up as well. And because your car's on fire, you're inhaling smoke, your lungs feel weird, you're just not sure you're okay. So the paramedics show up and they decide you need to go to the hospital. So the ambulance takes you and then you get treated by a doctor. Now, in this situation, your overall, the overall output of this entire scenario it does not fall on one person. Not one person is responsible for saving you, right? You may say, well, the doctor's responsible. Had the EMT not checked on you and determined you needed to go, you could have went home and died. Had the ambulance driver not driven you to the hospital, you would have had to walk. Had the firefighter not put your car out, you probably would have died in your car. And had the police not showed up, you probably would have died as well. Each of these people played a vital role. And together they add up not to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people, but they add up far beyond that. Their efficiency totally saved your life. I know it's a ridiculous example. It's a simple example, but it occurs all around us, and we can observe this in many different types of small group interactions. Think to Scooby-Doo, and just a warning, I'm going to use Scooby-Doo a lot in this course. But think about any mystery that Scooby-Doo and the gang have solved. It's never been because one of them did one thing and another did another and another did another and another did another and another did another. No, together they all brought something to the table. Sometimes Shaggy and Scooby would work together. Sometimes Velma and Fred would work together, and they added to each other and added to the value of the group in unique ways. This is where non-summativity and interdependence really merge. Beyond those two concepts, there are also a few other concepts that the textbook notes that are super important to consider as you're working towards an intended purpose in a small group. And these are a little bit more of economic terms, but they are very, very important. The first is the concept of multifinality. Now, multifinality is a principle of systems theory that says systems starting out at the same place can reach different endpoints. And I guarantee this is what we're going to see this semester. In this course, you all are starting off on the same foot, in the same way, with the same task, with the same instructions, with the same resources. But what you do with those tasks and those resources and those instructions, I guarantee you is going to propel you each in different directions. So I don't want to give too much away about or give too many ideas away about your service learning project. But I can tell you, I guarantee you, you will each do something different. In terms of practicality, think about The Amazing Race. On The Amazing Race television show, they drop a group of people, a large group of people, off at the same spot. They give them instructions and they say, go. But the whole premise of the show and the whole reason the show exists is to follow different groups of people as they go through obstacle courses and this grand maze in different ways. That's multifinality. They start at the same place but end up in different directions. On the flip side, there's also a component called equifinality. And this is a principle of systems theory that says different systems can reach the same endpoint. Now, this we see very, very commonly. Look no further than to the 2016 election. A lot of people started out on the national platform. In fact, the 2016 election cycle had, I believe, more primary candidates than almost any other election in our nation's history, and certainly in any other election in our lifetime. Now, these people started out in the same contest, but with much different platforms. And so Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, the two final nominees, are a great example here. They started in completely different ways, but they both wound up in the same spot as their party's nominee. Very, very practical, very, very real. And we see this applied in our regular small group interactions as well. Now, how this happens, how changes happen, how people come to arrive at the same goal or different goals, those are also related to highly theoretical terms as well. It's all part of the system working together. As you read Chapter 3, note some of these terms as well. we note that multiple causation is a significant factor in the group communication process. And multiple causation is the principle that each change in a system is caused by not just one factor, but numerous factors. There's a lot going on. So let's kind of break this down ever so slightly. Let's assume that the end goal is successful outcome or organizational change. We know that these two things here are what's led us to that successful outcome or organizational change, and we choose one over the other, but really those in and of themselves are insufficient. There are a host of variables on the backside that influence how we've even arrived at those conclusions, and those variables interact with each other in unique ways. Let's take the presidential election yet again. We've of course got Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. Those are again, these blue clouds, those are the two choices that we have. The result of the 2016 election is successful outcome or organizational change. We're going to have a new president, right? But there are a host of variables that led to this even being possible. I mean, on the Republican side, we had Ted Cruz drop out, fighting a bitter fight to the end. Same thing with Bernie Sanders on the right for the Democratic Party. Each of these was just one variable. One variable. We've got a host of others. I mean, we had email scandal, Benghazi scandal, threats of violence from Trump towards Hillary Clinton. We had a host of weird issues in the 2016 election cycle. They all interact together in unique ways to create this grand narrative, and this will go down in the annals of history for this successful battle for the White House. These variables are super crucial to consider because you also need to consider what variables your group will face that will either help or hurt their final outcome. Variables are a statistical word. In fact, most studies of correlation look at how specific variables interact with each other. This is a study I pulled from online. This looks at the interactions between baby's weight at birth, the family income of that baby's family at birth, the family income of that child at 10, the mother's age, and the father's age, and it looked to see if that determined future success for that individual. Interesting, right? But really, variables contribute a lot to our success and or our demise. And in groups, there are a host of variables that may come into play that can help or hurt us, such as individual moods, the time of day we meet, our individual communication style, the way our last meeting went. Was it successful? Was it a failure? Variables are a critical component of this systems theory model. And as you dig deeper, the textbook actually outlines, figure 3.1 on page 61 has a model that looks a lot like this. And I can tell you that this model will make a resurgence in this course numerous times. But it says that within any environment, and this larger blue circle is the environment, there are a host of variables that come into play. With groups, there are input variables, there are throughput variables, and there are output variables. And then surrounding all of those, there are environmental variables. Let's break these down a little bit more clear. Let's talk about input variables. Input variables are simply the energy, information, and raw material used by an open system that are transformed into output by throughput variables or processes. This is simply what people bring to the table. What's your input to the group? What are you bringing to the group? What raw materials, strategies, experiences you have that help us accomplish our common goal. There are some standards listed for input variables. First, members should share basic beliefs and values about the purpose of the group. Everybody that brings something into the group must be on the same page about what those individual contributions will do to facilitate the overall end goal of that group. Second, members should understand and accept the group's purpose. You can't have one member trying to do one thing and another member trying to do another. Everybody needs to be on the same page. Next, the number of members in a group should be as small as possible so long as the necessary variety of perspectives is represented. This goes back to something we learned in Chapter 1, that the fewer members possible, actually, the better. Next, group members should understand the group's relationship to other groups and organizations and what resources they can count on. Keep in mind that resources don't always mean money. Sometimes it's information, sometimes it's assistance, sometimes it really could be anything. Next, the group must plan adequately and have enough time to do its work. And then finally, group meetings should be regular, comfortable, and allow for free discussion. These are the standards that really need to be in place to allow for the free-flowing nature of input variables. That process then moves us to throughput. And the textbook defines throughput as the actual functioning of a system, the actual of doing something, how the system transforms inputs into outputs. And again, there are a series of standards that we can apply to throughput variables. First, members must see each other as dependable and reliable, and must be dependable and reliable in order for that throughput to actually happen. Members should express themselves competently and be considerate of other members. So during the throughput process, just don't be a jerk. Be nice. Be open. Collaborate. Next, make sure members' roles are relatively stable, understood, and accepted. Sure, leadership may change. Some person may occupy at one time, another may do it another. But in general, we should occupy consistent roles so that we know how to thrive in those roles. If we're constantly changing roles, we're not going to accomplish the task at hand because we're too busy acclimating ourselves to the new role. Next, all members should have relatively equal status. Even if there's a clear leader, it should never be purely hierarchical. Everybody should have equal say in the group. That's what makes group work so unique. Next, norms and rules should be understood and followed or discussed openly and changed when they fail. Those norms and rules are important. Said or unsaid, they need to be followed. Everybody needs to be on the same page. This is really all about unity. Make sure communication flows freely in all directions. The least powerful member should feel completely comfortable talking to the most powerful member, and vice versa. And finally, make sure procedures are efficient and members contribute to developing them. All of these work together to holistically situate an atmosphere in which throughput can effectively happen, with the end result being effective output. And output variables are anything that is produced by a system. Could be a tangible product, could be a change. In a small group, this includes things even as simple as reports, resolutions, changes in cohesiveness, and even attitude changes in members. Outputs can be huge, but they can also be very small. And again, we see a standards applied for output variables. First, members should perceive that the group's purpose has been achieved. They should also be personally satisfied with their respective roles in the group, the discussion and the group work process, and their relationship with other members. So this final outcome isn't just about the task, it's also, do you feel good about it? Are you confident? Do you feel satisfied? Next, members should feel like a cohesive unit. Again, do you feel satisfied? The group's leadership should be stable and reliable. Even if leadership has changed, the feel of leadership should feel consistent. Next, the group should be a culture that reflects its unique qualities and values. If you're composed of diverse people groups, celebrate that. And make sure the overall feel of the group acknowledges and celebrates that as well. Next, the parent organization, if one even exists, and in this class one does, I serve as a parent organization, as do our community partners, they should be strengthened as a result of the group's work, not weakened and not done anything with. They should be strengthened. Then there are environmental variables. These are the things that occur outside of the control of the group. And the environment is the context or setting in which a small group system exists. Now, those systems could be a variety of different types, and we're going to conclude by talking about the difference between open or closed systems. Open systems are those systems with relatively permeable boundaries, producing a high degree of interchange between the system and its environment. And then closed systems are systems, such as small groups, with relatively impermeable boundaries, resulting in little interchange between the system and its environment. And we can even see this in terms of conversation and dialogue as well. Open systems are much more free-flowing in terms of ideas, and closed systems are not. How we structure the open or closed nature of a system is really dependent on one thing, and that is feedback, which is a response to a system's output. It may come in the form of information or tangible resources or anything else, and it helps the system determine whether or not it needs to make adjustments in moving towards its goal. This is a constantly iterative process. And the overall success of a group is really dependent on the environment in which that group exists. So again, there are standards for environmental variables. For the environment, in an ideal situation, the environment should publicly recognize the accomplishments of the group and reward the group as a whole, if it's allowable. In the context of this course, that makes sense. Well, we know the environment you're working in is a university. I'm going to acknowledge you with a grade. You're going to be working in the community. Our community partners are going to acknowledge the hard work that you do. In some contexts, there is no real pinpointable environment, so it may not be possible. Next, the environment should supply whatever informational resources the group needs, so any information. The environment should supply whatever resources and expertise the group needs. And I put an asterisk here because resources, I want to clarify, does not mean money. Next, and finally, the environment should provide a supportive atmosphere for the group. Again, in the context of this course, you're going to see all of these come into play. But know that as you go out in the future, you may not. It changes. So after getting all these standards, we've got to ask, are you for real? Are you actually a real group? And if you've read the textbook, you know that there's this principle called the bona fide group perspective. And that's the perspective that focuses on naturally occurring groups with stable but permeable boundaries and are interdependent with their environment. Are you for real a bona fide group? Well, here are standards to judge. Do you have stable but permeable boundaries? And are you interdependent with relevant contexts? Yes. So, you could argue that you're a bona fide group. Some may say, but we're not a naturally occurring group. That's the textbook definition. And I would say you're right there as well. You've been placed in these groups. You're kind of an ad hoc group. However, this is your life. School's your life. We can call it naturally occurring. And I think we can argue that you are a bona fide group indeed. So, as a bona fide group, now what? What are you going to do? Well, this is the conclusion of the lecture. And I hope now, the conclusion of lecture number 3, you have a little bit more of a sense of what you're going to do, but not just what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, how you're going to think about it. I encourage you to be looking ahead, thinking about your group project, thinking about the things that lie before you. Don't put them off. As always, please make sure you complete the study guide. And until next time, thanks for watching.